So today's video is a project that's actually about 10 years in the making. You see, a very long time ago, Jen expressed to me a massive desire to create the Twilight Sisters, which are a pair of elven sisters riding on a woodland dragon. However, the model for this is completely abandoned by Games Workshop. And we've been waiting for an appropriate substitute, good wood elves, for so long, but the time has finally come. Many years ago, I bought Jen the Carmine Dragon from Forge World, and today we're sponsored by Corvus Belli and Warcrow, which is their new game, and they have a new faction, the CNN, which is some of the nicest elf sculpts I've ever seen. So we're gonna be making an awesome Kitbashing conversion today of two sisters riding a dragon. It's tabletop time.
So, this is a project that I've had in my mind for a really long time, so I'm super excited to finally be doing this and sharing this experience with you guys as well. I first discovered the Twilight Sisters when I wanted to start a wood elf army. This was back in the day when fantasy was about to be changed over to Age of Sigmar, and I remember looking at the Wood Elves rulebook and the Twilight Sisters being an option as a model that you could buy. But then looking at the actual kit, I wasn't super inspired by this. Don't get me wrong, it is pretty in a old Hammer sort of way, but for me aesthetically it kind of missed the mark just a little bit. And of course back then I was only just getting into Warhammer, so the idea of kitbashing or trying to make something completely unique was outside of my skill set. So I shelved the idea and had it brewing in the back of my mind for another time. And lo and behold, that day has arrived. Now I don't have a wood elf army and I'm not really interested in playing Warhammer Old World. If anything, I just love the theme and the aesthetic of this character, and I just wanted to create them as a really cool diorama and just a piece I can put into my cabinet. So now let's take a look at these CN Warcrow minis. Each of these are absolutely beautifully sculpted and have a little bit of personality in each of them too. There's some awesome options here that I think are gonna work perfect on this dragon, and I'm tossing between three different ones. Obviously, I can't fail to mention the fact that the size on these guys is a little bit different, and I was a tiny bit worried that they would be a little bit too big, but once posing them on top of the dragon, they actually fit really well. Even their poses dynamically also suit really well for the dragon. In the end, I settled for the two models that look like a pair of sisters, and I also thought their poses suited really well. It's also worth mentioning these models are Seercast as well, which I have never worked with before. Overall, I found the experience really enjoyable, and Seercast really shows how nice these casts are, as you can get all of the little details in there, and they're just nice to touch and nice to feel as well. So with the dragon all cleaned and glued together, as well as the sisters that I picked are gonna go on top, I could pass everything off to Dave so he could get into some gap filling.
Now, while Jen has talked a little bit about the Carmine Dragon, I did briefly want to mention, as I do some gap filling on this old Forge World model, just a note that I wanted to make. A few times on the channel, I've negatively talked about some of the Games Workshop sculpts, the fact that I don't like the original dragons. And around that time, there were some videos that came out for some creators that basically talked about how these kind of comments can detract on the sculptors that made them, and it's not necessarily representative of all of their work. And I just thought it was really interesting that the exact wood elf dragon that I don't like, the spaghetti noodly dragons from early Warhammer Fantasy, was sculpted by the same sculptor as this Carmine Dragon kit that I bought specifically because I thought it was a really cool dragon. So Trish Carden did both, and it shows how much of the project is down to personal preference and the brief, because a lot of people love the old spaghetti dragons and a lot of people love this new Carmine Dragon. But now that I've prattled on, you can see that I've gap filled the model, mixing up green stuff and Milliput and just shoving it in all of these cracks and making sure to use a sculpting tool, just kind of ease it in around the scales and make it feel pretty seamless.
So it wouldn't be a Jen video if I didn't jump into Photoshop and sort of try to work my way around this project. There's a lot of little bits and pieces that I mentally need to figure out how this is going to work. So first up, we have our Carmine Dragon. Now, its head is in one direction when its body's facing another direction, but I think this particular angle that I've picked pretty much shows off everything and aesthetically looks the best. Now, when comparing the Carmine Dragon to the Forest Dragon, it's missing a little bit of those foresty elements. So I'm gonna add a bunch of branches and leaves and stuff here and there, comparing it to the Total War Forest Dragon, taking a lot of inspiration from that particular model and design. So once he's looking thoroughly foresty, it's time to move on to the Twilight Sisters. Now, as I mentioned before, there were three models I was tossing up between using, but their silhouettes are kind of similar and I just need to figure out how I wanted to pose them on the dragon itself. I knew one could work particularly well on the horns and kind of on the top of his head, but I feel like another would look really cool in between his wingspan. Once I had these in place and of course added in their little elements that make them the Twilight Sisters, I was pretty happy with how this was looking. The one thing I did notice and absolutely wanted to include was the pattern of a monarch butterfly in the middle of the dragon's wings. Now this is kind of aesthetically really cool. It's something I would have never thought to have done. So I've just grabbed the texture of a monarch butterfly and just shoved it into his wings and just masked it out so at least it's on there and I can remember that that's something I want to do later. I then need to add all the bitsy foresty parts down the bottom for his base to make it look like the forest dragon's in a forest. So with that all done, I pretty much have a foolproof plan onto how I'm going to tackle this model. So moving on to the next step of this project, which is painting up these sisters. Now time is of the essence with this project, so I had to work a little bit back and forth to try and get everything done on time. This means I'm going to paint the sisters separately to the dragon. The original paint scheme incorporates more earthy tones, bunch of greens and browns, so I'm going to stick to that sort of color palette when it comes to painting these guys and the dragon as well. Of course, I can't forget my original reference as well, which is the Twilight Sisters. When looking at the Twilight Sisters, I like to think they're basically like the yin and yang. So one of them represents the light side and one of them represents the dark side. The only thing I needed to make sure here was basically that their hair color was different as well as the color of their masks. Otherwise, I could paint everything else pretty much exactly the same. Again, incorporating lots of greens and brown tones, which is just perfect for that wood elf aesthetic. When it comes to painting, I've been trying to incorporate more saturated and brighter colors into my painting, taking a lot of inspiration and painting techniques from Suggs from Rogue Hobbies. Again, really just trying to bring up that saturation so my models pop a little bit more. And overall, I'm super happy with how these sisters turned out, and I think they're gonna look absolutely sick on their dragon. So I'm gonna pass it off to Dave to incorporate maybe one of the most important things when it comes to these sisters.
So Jen's established some of her foundational paints, but on this project, we kind of have to bounce it back and forth to make sure that we're making the best use of our time. So even though these models have started their paint job, it's time for me to paint the masks. And these CNN models are absolutely gorgeous, but the one nod we do want to make to the Twilight Sisters is I do want to add their half moon masks. So I carve out some green stuff and smoosh it onto their face, then use a sculpting tool and a knife to just cut away the excess until I can create fairly symmetrical designs. Now, one of the hardest things to do with sculpting is to create a free floating area. So the spike where the helm raises above the headline is the only area of these masks that is a little bit inconsistent between my two sculpts. But overall, given the scale, given the detail, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out, and I can't wait to see how Jen paints them. So you've probably seen these gorgeous elves and thought, what are they from? Well, they are from Warcrow. They are the new CNR from Corvus Belli's game Warcrow. And if you've been watching the channel, Corvus Belli recently flew me to America to Adepticon where I got to demo the game. And this game is awesome. They've got some really novel dice mechanics that allow you to manipulate your rolls and get different effects with all of your units. And it has that fast-paced fun of a skirmish game, but it feels a little bit larger, like you're commanding small squads around the battlefield. I had a lot of fun with it, and I have to say, I really love the factions. The CNR and the new Wood Elves are the nicest Wood Elf models I've seen sculpted in a decade. There's also my favorites, the Hegemony of Embersig. And one of the reasons I like these guys is because they actually have men, elves, and dwarves all in the same faction with the same uniforms, which is a unique take on a unified Mortal Realms army that I've not seen before. So if you're ready to try out a new game from fantastic creators with a great reputation, go check out Warcrow by Corvus Belli. It's really exciting to be at the early stages of a game where you get to see all the factions getting released and developed, and I'm confident Corvus Belli are going to do a great job of it. Corvus Belli are most known for Infinity, and one of the things about Infinity that some people love and some people don't love is all the models are white metal. Well, Warcrow models are CO cast, so if you prefer not to work with metal, definitely check out Warcrow. Thank you so much to Corvus Belli for sponsoring the video. So now let's check back in with Jen and see how she's going painting.
Dragon, dragon, dragon. It's the forest dragon. Woo! Okay, so now it's time to tackle the biggest part of this project, which is the dragon. And he is a big boy. There is a lot of texture and stuff on this guy that I need to paint in. There's two ways I can go about painting the forest dragon. There's the original paint scheme and sculpt that was done for Warhammer, or there is the Total War variant. And I personally think that I like the Total War one a little bit more. I think it's just a little bit more realistic and I can interpret it a bit better on this model. So I'm gonna go with that paint scheme and basically, look, he's a forest dragon, he's gonna be green, which is great. And then like most dragons, they have a different colored underbelly, working in some yellows and some browns as well. One of my favorite parts of this model in particular is actually the horns. I feel like I haven't painted horns in quite a while, and this guy has a butt ton of them. Something I do love about this sort of era of models is the fact that it doesn't have too much texture. So when it came to the horns, I was able to do a little bit of freehand and interpret how I wanted the lines of a horn to look. And I really do love this part of miniature painting, is creating texture when there is none. Another part I got to do this was his tongue as well, creating a little bit of a stippling effect for all the little bumps and ridges that you would find on a tongue.
Just like those gorgeous elves, Jen has already started painting the Carmine Dragon, but as we said, we kind of have to handball the project between us to get it done. So at this stage, with the sisters painted and the dragon mostly painted, I can incorporate the sisters onto the model. Now we have one which has an awesome pose and she's going to be leaning on the front horn of the dragon, but the next one is going to be sitting up in a crook between its shoulder blades. And I really want to make this dragon feel a lot more unique and a lot more foresty, so it's time to glue on some bits. To do this, I grabbed some suitable parts from the Sylvaneth range, and I find areas on the model that I feel like we could add some little growths and spurs of tree branch coming out of the dragon. In particular, I accent areas of the dragon where I think the silhouette is maybe slightly lacking, such as the hips, because I feel like unlike the dragon from Shrek, this dragon doesn't have any arse at all. The dragon got a big booty. With all the branches cut down and positioned in the right places, I can glue them on and then use some putty to sculpt little areas where the scales give way to these eruptions of wood growth. I pay particular attention around the shoulders where I'm incorporating the sisters, as the model Jen has chosen from the Cianan range is actually leaning into the crook of a piece of wooden branch. So this one's the one I really have to get right. I also try and do a symmetrical piece placed on the other shoulder, but I use a smaller branch here. As Jen says, these are sisters, not twins. So basically we don't want it to be perfectly symmetrical. We want it to have an air of wild, natural growth to it. With all of these areas implanted, seated in, and sculpted onto the model, let's go see Jen take it home and finish out this paint job.
Now, as I'd seen previously, the inside of this dragon's wings is actually the same pattern as a monarch butterfly. I kind of forgot that there's a lot of rigid texture in these wings, which means it's gonna be very difficult for me to try and paint in this, but I'm gonna try my best. Using those beautiful oranges and browns that you would find in a monarch butterfly, I tried my best to copy the design so they would show on the inside and outside of his wings. Oh, this project. Oh my goodness. So we're almost done. We're at the finish line. Everything's looking great. Dragon is basically done. Sisters are painted. Everything is looking spicy and nice. And then we need to move on to the base. Because the dragon takes up so much of the base, I'm just gonna incorporate little bits and pieces here just to make it look like a forest. Starting with some texture paste just to blend it all in together, and then incorporating little bits and pieces, including some rocks and trees. To really marry the two together, I'm gonna incorporate little bits of the basing onto the dragon himself, including the little bits of tendril as well that'll be coming from some of the horns and other bits and bobs that are on his body. And with all these pieces finally put together, it's time to show you guys the final reveal of the Twilight Sisters on the Forest Dragon.
Thank you to all of our wonderful patrons who keep the channel going. And of course, one of the perks of joining our Patreon is you get a verbal shout out in a video. So thank you to Lovely Bell Person, Edward, Kyle Gordon, Aaron Felger, and Crazy Puck. Welcome to the Tabletop Time Patreon. Check out the exclusive Discord, come say hi. And we got a backlog of behind the scenes vlogs, some extended cut videos there, and also our monthly mini review. The Patreon really is what keeps the channel going, so we'd love it if you could go and give us some support. Thanks everyone.
It's all finished!
It looks amazing. It's been so fun to work on this with you, Jen. Well done.
Thank you, thank you. This has been like 10 years in the making, so I'm super happy to have done this and shared the experience with everyone as well.
What a cool centerpiece. And the star of the show, of course, those Warcrow models. And if you want to find out more, check out the links in the description. And Corvus Belli also wanted me to tell you about Interplanetario, which is their in-person event in Vigo, Spain, which is running between July 18th and 20th. They have learn to play workshops, tournaments for Infinity and Aristea, as well as, very importantly, the Crow Awards, a big painting competition with 15,000 euros worth of prizes. All the links are in the description. Check all that out. It should be really cool if you're anywhere near Spain. Yeah, I wish I could be there. It would be really cool.
Otherwise, that's pretty much it for this video. I'm gonna put this in my cabinet at home and look at it because it's so pretty.
Jazza, can you get out of frame, please?
Yeah.
Come on.
You guys are done?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching. I hope you really enjoyed seeing me make these really cool buildings.